Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I appreciate you all so much. You're very, very special to me, so thank you for joining me this evening, and I do hope I find you remarkably well. I'm feeling fabulous, thank you very much, and I hope you're enjoying the change in weather, but I hope the weather is doing very well where you are. So before we get started with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. So how many people are staying here in your guest house, Mrs. Jones? I'm sure you appreciate we're going to need to interview everyone in the circumstances, says Detective Douglas McCaw, studying the nervous-looking woman through kindly brown eyes. He couldn't help feeling desperately sorry for the poor woman. She'd been running her guest house in the Blue Ridge Mountain area of North Carolina for 6 months now. She'd moved here all the way from Santa Barbara to start up a new life for herself, and then this had to happen, which could easily tarnish the reputation of her guest house, as mud tends to stick, and the ruthlessly unappeasable and avenging words from social media platforms can travel faster than the wind, and would do little to promote Mrs. Jones's guest house. Either way, the disquieted woman's young business was not going to get away from the situation completely unscathed, even if it only resulted in a few punishing bruises along the way. He watches the slender woman curiously, who looks to be in her early 40s, and is in very good nick for her age. She's straightening up her back, shifting uncomfortably in the upholstered chair, where she's sitting opposite him, studying him with her worried brown eyes, looking distinctly ill at ease as she plays with her deceased husband's wedding ring, which she wears on a chain around her neck. This mollifying action seems to soothe away her fretful nerves. Look, Detective McCaw, I would rather you called me Laura. No one calls me by my surname. I hate it when they do that. It's so impersonal. It's so formal. Is it really necessary to interview everyone at my guest house in the circumstances? I really don't want to draw any attention to this. I mean, I've been running this guest house now for 6 months. It's my only means of making an income. You do appreciate this could be very upsetting for my business, and also for my guests. They've come to stay at my guest house to get away from it all, to get some fresh air, some good exercise, and some home cooking, and to relax. I provide them with 3 square meals a day, and they can do what they like, go hiking, horse riding, exploring, fishing. You know that kind of stuff. I don't want to be responsible for ruining their holiday, nor do I want them to feel that they're under a cloud of suspicion. They came here for a holiday, for goodness sake, and now they're becoming suspects in a murder investigation, because one of my guests happened to take an infelicious, fortuitous tumble down the stairs. I mean, do you realise how ridiculous that sounds, Detective? Besides, it's not fair. I personally don't believe that any of my guests are even remotely capable of harming a fly, let alone killing someone intentionally. The idea is sheer lunacy. I'm sorry, but it is. Mrs. Jones. Oh, I'm very sorry. Correction, Laura. I don't know if you comprehend the full gravity of this precarious situation we find ourselves in here. Someone could potentially have been murdered on your property, in your guest house. Whether you like it or not, every single one of your guests is a plausible suspect and needs to be interviewed. Someone staying on your premises may conceivably have pushed Mrs. Blanche Hoover down the staircase on purpose. One of your guests could be a murderer. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, I do, Detective. But I can't help feeling you're clutching at straws and barking up the wrong tree, seeing something sinister that's not really here. I personally believe that Mrs. Blanche Hoover tripped when she took a calamitous fall down the staircase, hitting her head explosively against the floor, inexpediently dying on impact. It's very tragic, Detective. I blame myself for what happened. You see, the floor beneath the staircase is solid marble. It was possibly an accident waiting to happen. I should have the area below the staircase carpeted to avoid it from happening again. But, Detective, I'd like to reiterate This is exactly what it is, an accident, a very unfortunate one. I am naturally devastated, Detective. I've been lamenting about what happened to poor Blanche, but I don't for a single minute believe it was anything less than an accident. Neither do any of the guests that are staying here. I do appreciate you need to satisfy yourself that this really was an accident, but I don't want you to gratuitously upset my guests or ineptly ruin their holiday in the process. Do you understand where I'm coming from, Detective? You have my word, Laura, that I will do my level best to make your guests as comfortable as I possibly can. Nevertheless, I need to ask them some awkward questions, or otherwise I won't be doing my job correctly. The coroner does not believe Blanche's inauspicious fall down that staircase of yours was an accident, although I will admit she cannot rule that possibility out. She believes, given the peculiar trajectory of the fall, that there's a distinct possibility that Blanche was intentionally pushed. Now, I won't overrule that this could be one of those ill-omened events, and most probably is. As you know, we had the police forensic team here yesterday, making measurements and so forth, and they're in agreement with the coroner's findings. They believe Blanche was possibly pushed down the staircase, instead of just rolling down the stairs. She was hurled over the steps, airborne for a brief moment, and then she came crashing down, dying on impact, when her head regretfully hit the marble floor very hard. Of course, it is plausible that someone came running past her in a dreadful hurry, or your large Irish wolfhound, if you don't mind my saying so, that can be quite rambunctious, bumped into her, knocking her over. I hasten to say, your dog gave me quite the welcome when I came to your front door yesterday. I was licked by that long pink tongue of his, within an inch of my life. I understand he was licking Blanche's face when she was discovered at the bottom of the staircase, so that is also a very likely possibility that cannot be overruled. Many people, I hasten to say, and regretfully too, die being pushed over accidentally down the stairs by an over-enthusiastic dog. It happens more than I care to think. So next you're going to be interviewing my dog, to see if he's a likely culprit, says Laura, sighing in exasperation. I assure you, Detective, Popsicle did not cause Blanche's untimely death. I know this is very distressing for you, Laura, but I need your help in this regard. I can appreciate why you are upset about this. You are worried about your business's reputation, and understandably so. I know where you're coming from, but we need to find justice for this woman, if she was intentionally pushed down the stairs. We need to find out who would mean to harm her, and why. Who was it who found Blanche dead at the bottom of the staircase? It was Blanche's friend Eleanor, Detective, who found her. She'd gone to the toilet for her ablutions, and then was going downstairs to get some milk from the refrigerator. Eleanor was up in bed, looking at Netflix. She said she heard a loud crashing sound. She ran downstairs quickly to find her friend at the bottom of the staircase. I jumped out of my skin when I heard those deafening screams. I ran down the stairs to find Blanche lying at the bottom of the staircase on the marble floor, with Eleanor leaning over her, crying out in horror, and Popsicle licking her face. Blanche was motionless. Her eyes were glazed over. There was so much blood all over the floor, everywhere. It looked grotesquely macabre, like a scene from a traffic accident. Too gruesome for words, Detective, with so much gory blood spilling from her head injury. I never knew a person could lose so much blood just from the head. We knew she was dead, but we called 911. The EMTs arrived on the scene almost immediately. They affirmed what we already knew, but they were adamant it was an accident. The EMTs said they'd seen nasty falls like this from staircases, and that they were more common than you could imagine. Now, what time was this? Can you remember? Well, it was about 8:30 in the morning, I think. Now, I want you to think very, very carefully, Laura. Did you see anybody else up and about at this time? Any kind of suspicious behaviour that grabbed your attention? Well, most of the household were up and about already, but they weren't in. My 4 cleaners were cleaning everybody's cars in the carport at the time. No one was around in the house apart from Eleanor, who was up in her bedroom. I was in my bedroom as well, reading a book, and Elvis was sitting on the wraparound porch. He arrived on the scene to see what was going on. But he wouldn't be much help. The man is blinded in one of his eyes from a hunting accident, and his vision in his good eye is greatly impaired. But they do say he will make a recovery in time. I feel very sorry for him. He walks everywhere with a white stick. I think he enjoys coming here to be around people, to enjoy some home cooking and fresh air. But he's harmless. He wouldn't hurt a fly. And as for Eleanor, she and Blanche were like sisters. Then there's me, Detective. I moved all the way from Santa Barbara, as I told you, to start up this business of mine, after my husband died from a massive stroke. I needed to get away from that life, begin again. And this I need, Detective, like a hole in the head. So you are saying Eleanor and Elvis were the only ones in the house at the time, other than you? Were there others? I mean, how many people are staying at this guest house of yours? Well, my guest house is not full at the moment. There's Mr. Price, who is here with his 10-year-old son. They've come here to fish, so they're fishing at the lake. Well, that's what they were doing when this happened. They've been bringing back fish for everyone to enjoy with our evening meals. Those two are natural fishermen, let me tell you. Then there are the two Thatcher sisters, Maddie and Natasha, and they were out hiking at the time. They're the loveliest of girls. Natasha's a nurse, you know. She spends her life helping people. Then there's Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, and they were taking an early morning hike. They're charming, a very easygoing retired couple in their 70s from New Jersey. I assure you, Detective, none of my guests fit the profile of someone that is capable of murder. The idea is completely nonsensical. My guests are exceptionally congenial people. There were only 3 of us in the house when this happened. Detective McCaw physically frowns. He rubs a hand awkwardly through his dark hair, heedlessly pulling at a curl that is hovering over his ear like a stray tentacle. He twists it in his finger. Is there a possibility, he wonders privately to himself, that the coroner's thoughts regarding this accident were completely wrong, and Blanche really had taken a rather unlucky tumble? It was true, all the benevolent guests seemed benign, innocent people who had come to this guest house for a welcome break, to escape their lives in a busy city, and to enjoy some much-needed fresh air. Why would they want to harm Blanche? Detective McCaw knew he was rudely intruding in all these people's lives over something that was likely, very plausibly, an accident, but he had to make certain that this was the case. In his gut there was a deep stirring instinctive feeling that told him he was missing something here, but for the life of him he couldn't perceive or fathom what it actually was. It was likely he was going to have to close the file on this case, affirming it to be an accident. It was easier that way, but he needed to be fully satisfied that this was indeed the case. Detective McCaw did not like having to interview all the guests, but he had to find out if anyone had a connection to Blanche. But he suspected, as Laura had wisely pointed out, that he was clutching at straws. But he wouldn't be doing his job if he didn't ask all the uncomfortable, awkward questions that needed to be asked. Was it possible that Eleanor, who was Blanche's friend, had pushed her girlfriend down the staircase on purpose? Maybe they'd had an argument, and in an impromptu outburst of impassioned infuriation, she'd run after her friend and inadvertently pushed her down the stairs. In Officer McCaw's mind, it was the most likely explanation. She was in the house, after all, at the time, and the first one to discover the deceased body of her friend. It was always the person that arrived first on scene. There was a particular interest in a police investigation. He'd need to interview Eleanor first, study her body language for any lingering signs of guileful duplicity, or eye contact that deliberately avoided meeting his gaze. Suffice to say, when the lugubrious young woman sat down before him, she clearly was traumatized by her girlfriend's death. It was difficult for Detective McCaw to feel it was even remotely feasible that this young woman was capable of harming her best friend. Either that, or she was a brilliantly proficient actress, the latter which he thought exceedingly implausible and highly doubtful. And with the greatest of respect, this woman did not look the type of consummate, accomplished actress capable of winning any Academy Awards any time soon. In truth, Eleanor looked punctured and deflated by her grief, like a collapsed beach ball that had lost all its bounce. She slank awkwardly into the chair opposite the detective, her body looking like a crumpled rag doll. Her face was pink, blotchy and puffy. Detective McCall thought Eleanor was an unremarkable average woman, in her late 30s, with blonde shoulder-length hair and bloodshot blue eyes. She was sitting there with a box of tissues, blowing her nose all the time, looking dreadfully sorry for herself. "I am very, very sorry for your loss, young lady. It can't have been easy losing your friend this dreadful way. So you were the one that discovered your friend, I understand, at the bottom of the staircase. Am I right?" The young woman nodded, wiping away a tear that crawled out of the corner of her eye with a tissue. "You were not having a fight or something by any chance with Blanche? Did things possibly get out of hand in a moment of heated rage? Possibly you pushed your friend and she accidentally fell down the stairs. If this did happen, young lady, it would be best to get it off your chest. Living with the guilt can eat away at you. Believe me, I know all about that. I've been in this game for a long time, you know." Eleanor looked at the detective in horror, her jaw dropping open, her eyes growing round. "How dare you, detective? What are you implying? That I murdered my best friend? Are you for real? Blanche and me, we were the best of friends. I'd never harm a hair on her head. For your information, I can't even remember the last time Blanche and I had an argument. I'm a Libra detective. We hate conflict and discord. Harmony is our mantra." "So you didn't have an argument with her then?" "Of course not. We've been having a good time here. And besides, Blanche is very sad at the minute." The detective allowed Eleanor to talk, without much prodding. She seemed keen to unload her frustration onto anyone who was prepared to listen. "I'm sorry, detective. I didn't mean to snap at you like that. I know you're only doing your job. In truth, I just don't understand it at all," she says, blowing her nose into a tissue. "It's just so unfair. It really is. After everything that Blanche has been through. And now this. It doesn't make any sense at all. Who would want to push her down the stairs like that? It's nonsensical, detective. No one would want to hurt Blanche after everything she's been through, especially now. You don't suppose?" She looked up at the detective with an alarmed look on her face. "I don't suppose what?" asks the detective. "That Blanche could have done this to herself, detective. I mean, thrown herself down the staircase to end her despair, to end her melancholia." "I do not believe your friend threw herself down the staircase, as you suggest, based on the way she landed on the floor. How long have you known Blanche for?" "We were at school together. I've known her since I was 8 years old. She's been a single mother for the last 5 years. Her daughter was very sickly, you know, allergic to everything. She wasn't allowed dairy or anything like that. She was often rushed over to the hospital for severe allergic reactions. It was quite dreadful. Her daughter was so sickly, you see. And then this time, the poor thing, she didn't recover. Blanche's daughter died 2 weeks ago, detective. She was inconsolable with grief, so I brought her here. I thought coming to this guest house would be a marvellous idea. It would be a welcome escape. And now this. I feel wholly responsible for what had happened. I mean, if I hadn't brought her here, she might still be alive. It's not fair. It's not fair. Why does fate have to land her such a cruel blow, detective? Eleanor begins to unload her tears that spill down her face with a deep regret. I'm sorry, officer. I do believe this was an accident, but I promise you the people staying here, they're so nice, they've made us feel so welcome, and they would never want to harm her. But do you know of anyone in Blanche's own life who might wish to harm her? Well, the only person that I can think of is Blanche's ex-husband, but he lives in Guernsey now. It's the second largest Channel island, 30 miles west of Normandy in the English Channel. I know there's no love lost between the two of them, but the man is remarried now. He's got a child of his own and a new wife. Did your friend Blanche tell you why her relationship ended so abruptly with her husband? No, detective. Blanche lived in the moment. She was one of those people that never looked back. The detective was beginning to believe that Eleanor was right.
He interviewed all the people at the guest house, and there was no connection between any of them to Blanche. All 4 of the cleaners had been washing the cars in the carport at the time of the accident, so their whereabouts was accounted for. The only person who had crossed Blanche's path was one of the nurses, a young woman called Natasha, who rather reminded the detective of a doe. She had the most gentle brown eyes, and it would be hard-pressed to see the young woman ever harming a fly. "So have you met Blanche before, Miss Thatcher?" "That's right, Detective. I only realised this last night, when I recognised her. Well, actually not last night, yesterday. The poor woman, she's always coming into the hospital in our hometown, over and over again, with her 8-year-old daughter. The child was very sickly, officer. I heard she died 2 weeks ago. It was a tragic story." "Did you ever get to speak to the deceased, Miss Thatcher, while you were nursing?" "No. As I say so, I saw her around the children's hospital. Everyone knew who she was. The kid was always being brought in on multiple occasions for various sicknesses." "I see," says the detective, stroking his moustache reflectively. "But you never got to speak to her personally?" "Honestly, Detective, I may have. I really can't remember. I might have said something in passing, but I speak to so many children's parents. If I did speak to her, I can't remember." Natasha's story. I was so excited about this trip. Most people don't know that me and my sister Maddie are non-identical twins. We're very close, but neither of us tell people we're twins. Over the years, it's got exceedingly annoying, people asking us all those awkward questions about what it's like to be a twin. I think me and Maddie pride ourselves in our individuality, so we always kept the fact we were twins under wraps. People can see we're close, but to look at, we're incredibly different. I'm very glad about that. I'd hate to be identical. I could not imagine looking at myself every day in the mirror of my sister's appearance. It would drive me completely insane. I try to avoid looking in mirrors. People say I'm pretty, but for some reason I always see my flaws. I'll notice something about myself that I don't like. My father thinks it's because I'm a perfectionist. I'll notice the unfortunate spot on my chin, or the tired circles under my eyes, instead of seeing anything positive about my appearance. My sister is taller than I am, and bigger than me, but we've got the same straight hazelnut hair, with blonde highlights, and similar heart-shaped faces and brown eyes. But although you can see the likeness in the both of us, I don't think you'd be able to tell we were twins, and that's important to the both of us. Growing up, even my parents did not inform anyone who knew us we were twins, so it was our quintessential family secret. We became known as the Thatcher sisters, and my sister was the oldest. People assumed she was a year older than me, but in truth she was only seconds older than me. That was something we never shared with anyone. We both went to different schools so that we would be able to shine on our own merits, and we were grateful for that. Me and my sister always go on holidays together, and Maddie had found a guest house in the Blue Ridge Mountains where we could hang out for a week, where we could enjoy home cooking, the company of guests, hiking and exploring, as well as appreciating the exquisite mountain scenery. The journey to the location wasn't too bad, and thankfully the guest house wasn't hard to find. It was only 3 hours away from our hometown, so the convenience of the location was most welcome. I had never enjoyed travelling for a long time in a car, especially over long distances, so 3 hours suited me absolutely fine. Maddie was driving. She's much more of a punctilious driver than I am. We set off at 9 in the morning to arrive at the guest house in time for lunch. I had been working late shifts at the hospital, so I was absolutely exhausted, as working the hours that conflict with your natural biorhythms can really drain your energy and almost certainly pile on those extra pounds. Fortunately for me, I was a healthy weight, but let's just say many nighttime workers eat a lot more to keep themselves awake, to fight off those inevitable energy slumps. My sister worked for an accounting firm and told me if she ever saw another equation on this week away, she'd quite literally tear her hair out. The drive was incredibly pleasant. It was late spring, so the weather was agreeable. Indeed, I believe spring is the best time of the year. The weather may be a bit fresh, but the sunshine is perfect, and the countryside so lavishly laced with the abundance of new life. Trees sprouting new foliage, some covered in a plethora of confetti blossom. Of course, when we arrived at the guest house and observed the transfixing views of the countryside, we both gave each other a high five. We knew coming here had almost certainly been the right decision. I am always drawn towards mountain landscapes, and so is my sister. We share this in common. There is something so blissfully idyllic, so elevating about mountain views that arrests my attention, makes me feel so vibrantly alive, so energetically inspired. It also makes me so profoundly aware of how small I am in the grand scheme of things, and that puts all my worries into perspective. I'm in my early 20s, but sometimes I feel I've been around for a very long time. Hanging around a hospital can do that to you. I've been working in the hospital for years. I see death and dying on a regular basis. It reminds me all the time of my own mortality, and that our time on this earth is not all that long. But there is a distinct advantage to these sobering revelations. It makes me want to take life like a bull by the horns and live each day to the fullest, appreciating every single moment and every second. When we arrived at the guest house and parked our car in the large parking bay, basked under the shade of some mature, rather stately-looking oak trees, me and my sister stayed in our car for a few minutes longer, drinking in the fabulous views. My sister was congratulating herself for finding this treasured place. Maddie was always discovering the most incredible holiday destinations for the both of us, and finding this treasure was no exception to this golden rule. The guest house was much grander than I had anticipated, but then in truth it did not come cheap. The week would almost certainly burn a sizable hole in our pockets, but then holidays were about splashing out, weren't they, and spoiling yourself. The guest house was a stunning Georgian house. It was 3 stories, painted in a crisp white colour that looked so perfect against the viridescent countryside. But its formal facade was made all the more relaxed and homely, with the addition of tumbling scarlet roses weaving themselves over the front door and across the front wall. There were 3 attic windows that peered at us cheekily through the grey slate roof, and the smiling reflections from the large windows seemed to wink at us in the congenial light of the late morning. Moments later we saw the shadowy silhouette of a woman running out of the house towards us. When she got closer, we could see she had a warm, friendly smile that dappled her face, and she had a likeable benevolence about her. She was slender, wearing faded blue jeans and a pale green sweatshirt, and her brown shoulder-length hair was pinned away from her face in a small ponytail. She looked extremely polished, even though she wasn't wearing a stitch of makeup. Her skin was fair. Her brown eyes danced with a lively ebullience. It would seem that a rather uncoordinated Irish greyhound was jubilantly bounding by her side. His large, ungainly body was clumsily thumping into everything. He immediately jumped all over us, and his long pink tongue began to lick us like popsicles. The woman flushed with embarrassment, telling the dog, who was standing up on his hind legs with his paws pressing up against my shoulders, while his tongue began to wash my face, to please get down. To be fair, the obedient dog did as he was told, faithfully trotting to her side, and sat down next to her. I got the feeling that if he could have licked my face for as long as he wanted to, he would have most certainly done just that. I could not help myself from giggling. I'd never received such a rapturous, sloppy welcome from a strange dog before. "I do apologise for my dog's ebullient behaviour," says the woman, smiling at us warmly, and reaching out to shake our hands. "Welcome to Blue Ridge Hollow. My name is Laura Jones. I'll be your host for the next few days, and I hope you're thoroughly going to enjoy yourself here. I'll do everything in my power to ensure you have a good time. Oh, by the way, my dog's name is Popsicle, and I'm sure you know why," she says, laughing. "Nothing escapes that tongue of his. My dog licks everything. I'm afraid he does get his tongue into some unmentionables that I won't discuss right now with you." "No need to apologise for your dog. He's quite the charmer," I say. "I don't think me or my sister have ever received such a rapturous welcome before, and to arrive here with a washed face is almost certainly an added bonus," I tease. "I must admit this house of yours is so dreamy. I never imagined it would be like this. It's utterly charming." "I think so too," says Laura, sighing happily. "I've been running this lodge for 6 months now. So far, so good, keeping the fingers crossed, of course. I needed an adventure, you see, after my life in Santa Barbara. I thought this would be a fresh start for me. I've always wanted to live in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. That's why I chose to come out here. I was working a 9-to-5 job at the time. I had enough of that kind of lifestyle. I wanted something so much better for myself. So I went on a cookery course, and then I came out here and started up my own little guest house. The rest is history, of course. Initially I started advertising, but I'm booked up until next year, as people have been hearing about my place. So everyone who visits is usually a referral now, that they've received from a friend. Now let me help you with all your suitcases, and I'll show you up to your rooms. I hope you don't mind me being so presumptuous, but is this house an original? I ask. Oh, absolutely. There's nothing modern about this place, apart from the facelifts it's needed when I first bought it. The trouble with old houses is there are inevitably things that need to be fixed and repaired. The maintenance is ongoing. In my humble opinion, it's a small price to pay, to be able to live in a place checkered with such character and heritage that of course only comes with age. It's not haunted, then? I ask curiously. The woman pauses for a moment. Do you know, I've never thought about that before. I suppose it's possible, but I've been living in this house for 6 months now, and I've not had any outer-worldly experiences. Then it's official, I say. It's not haunted. I work in a hospital, you see. There's one hospital ward that is supposed to be haunted by an old lady. I work there during the night shift. The place creeps me out. I swear the temperature in that room just drops. Many of the children ask me who the old lady is who stands over their beds. They all describe the exact same woman, but there is no one working in the hospital that fits her description. I often feel when I'm in that ward that I'm being watched. It's so freaky. So no, this place can't be haunted. Believe me, you would know. Good, I'm glad to hear that, says our host. One less thing for me to worry about. So there we are. That's the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night. Be back with you then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.